I've decided to start a new life, without you. That sentence sliced through the elegant air of the rooftop banquet hall at the Grand Lexington Hotel like a blade. No one took another bite of their steak. The clinking of glasses ceased. Only a heavy, suffocating silence remained, along with 50 stunned pairs of eyes all fixed on me. My name is Claire Thompson. I'm 52 years old, and just seconds ago, I was still the wife of David, the man I once believed would walk with me to the very end of life. The evening was supposed to be about my daughter Lauren, who had just earned her bachelor's degree in communications from Duke University after 4 relentless years. We had planned this celebration for over a year, an intimate, cozy gathering of about 50 people, just close friends, family, neighbors, and longtime colleagues. The kind of people I thought would be there to share our joy. But David, my husband of 26 years, chose the exact moment he raised his glass to toast our daughter, right as the phone cameras lit up to announce our divorce. Lauren sat beside me, still wearing her graduation cap, her face frozen mid-smile in shock. I heard a sharp exhale from the next table, where a younger woman sat with a few people I once called friends. She awkwardly bent to pick up a napkin she'd dropped, clearly trying to avoid my gaze, though I didn't even bother to look at her. Allison Green, 33, David's former coworker, and, as I discovered a few weeks ago, the woman he had quietly been building his new life with. Doesn't Breen panic when she sees everything become darker and darker? I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't do any of the things David or the crowd expected from a wife publicly discarded in the middle of her daughter's celebration. I simply smiled. "Congratulations on being honest," I said, setting my wine glass down. Then I reached into my bag, a beige clutch I had chosen carefully, and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with wax. I gently placed it in front of David, right next to the untouched short ribs on his plate. "What's this?" he asked, his voice still laced with self-satisfaction. "This," I said, keeping my tone smooth, "is something you should read when you're alone." I turned to Lauren, placed a hand on her cheek, and said, "I'm so proud of you. No matter what happens, today is still your day." She nodded slightly, lips pressed tight. I saw the shimmer of tears in her eyes, but they didn't fall. My daughter was stronger than I'd ever realized. I stood, straightened the hem of my dress, and addressed the crowd still holding their breath. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate. Please enjoy the meal. I wish you a lovely afternoon." No one spoke. The only sound was the faint scraping of chairs as I stepped away, and the hush of wind brushing against the large windows as I exited the grand banquet room, like a chapter of my life quietly closing behind me. I didn't look back, but I clearly heard the door swing open with force, followed by David's voice, no longer steady, now frantic. "Claire, what the hell is in that envelope? What the hell did you just do?" I kept walking, my heels tapping steadily across the granite floor of the corridor. A wave of hot North Carolina summer air hit me as I pushed open the heavy door, searing, fierce, but more liberating than anything I'd felt in years. For the first time in decades, I could finally breathe. I smiled to myself, not bothering to turn around, because I knew the envelope on that table didn't just contain divorce papers. It held a quiet, razor-sharp declaration of war, one I'd been planning meticulously for 3 months. I didn't shed a tear as I drove home, but my heart ached with every turn. Not because David had just exposed his true colors, but because I, the woman who once handed him her whole world, had taken nearly 3 decades to see it clearly. The house in Greenwood Hills looked as calm as ever, but this time, it didn't feel like home. It felt like a museum of paused dreams, where I had stored every delayed hope, every deferred ambition, for the man who had just smugly ended our marriage in front of everyone. I once had a very American dream. Graduated top of my class in economics from UCLA, got recruited by a major investment firm in New York, but at 26, when I found out I was pregnant with Lauren, I gave it all up to follow David to Charlotte, where he was launching his first tech startup. Just for a few years. he said. "Once the company stabilizes, you can do whatever you want." Those few years stretched into 23. During that time, I became everything. Unpaid wife, unofficial bookkeeper, full-time caregiver, and the cleanup crew for every one of David's failures. First, he dumped all our savings into a dating app for pets. It tanked after 6 months. Then, he got tired of tech and opened a craft beer pub that lost money for 3 years. Most recently, he poured over $80,000 into a chain of health food restaurants because everyone's going green now. I was the one who salvaged the finances after each disaster. I negotiated with banks when he missed loan payments, begged investors for extensions, and even refinanced our home when Lauren was in 4th grade, just to preserve David's so-called pride. We never lived lavishly, but through strict budgeting, I made sure Lauren had everything she needed. She never lacked for textbooks, never missed a field trip, always had a birthday cake, even if it meant I had to take on freelance accounting gigs late into the night. I once believed that if I just held on long enough, David would change. He'd finally recognize that I was the one keeping the ship afloat. But no, he chose to betray me with Allison, a woman I once invited to our Christmas party, who had sat in our living room and once called me inspiring. Ironic, isn't it? I remember the one time I suggested opening a financial consulting firm for women going through divorce. David laughed and said, "Who'd come? If a woman can afford financial advice, she's not getting divorced." That comment sliced right through my pride. But I shelved the dream, like I always did. Lauren got into college on scholarship, worked part-time, and I quietly scraped together every dollar I could into a private fund so she'd never worry about tuition. Even when David insisted, let her figure it out, just like our parents did. Now I finally understand. David never wanted me to succeed, because success would threaten the fragile sense of control he clung to. Tonight, as I opened my aging laptop in the bedroom, where I'd once handled all his bookkeeping, I no longer felt like the silent guardian of a failing marriage. I was the woman who had been preparing for this battle all along, waiting only for the right moment. David thought I would fall apart, but he forgot who he was dealing with. A woman with over 20 years of experience tracking every number, every transfer, every questionable transaction, and a file of evidence locked away in my attorney's office, ready to be unleashed. Only hours after his little surprise, my phone began buzzing. Messages from Lauren, from family, from friends. But I replied to only one. "My sweet girl, I'm okay. Today is still your day. Enjoy it. We'll talk tonight. I love you." I didn't need to raise my voice to be heard. The truth would speak for itself. And this time, I was holding the microphone. It all began with one suspicious transaction. One evening in early March, while reviewing our savings account to pay Lauren's final semester tuition, I noticed a transfer for $4,800 labeled Interior Design Consultation. The strange part was, we had no plans to renovate anything, and we had never hired any interior designer. I didn't react right away. I stayed quiet and began to trace it. Because I knew one thing: women like me don't get to respond impulsively. We have to move in silence, with certainty, and down to the last cent. After 20 years as a financial auditor at Arbor & Klein, I had learned to detect fraud just from how transactions were labeled. And this time, my instincts told me that my husband was siphoning our joint funds to build a new nest with someone else. I created a separate Excel file, innocently named Lauren Medical Records 2024, and began downloading 12 months of bank statements. For each unfamiliar charge, I cross-referenced transaction codes, matched dates, and even made anonymous calls to verify details. What I found stunned me. David had transferred over $72,000 in the span of a year, not for investments like he claimed, but to put down a deposit on a penthouse in Asheville, buy jewelry from Tiffany & Co., and fund a 5-day resort getaway in Mexico with someone named Green. Allison Green. She wasn't just the other woman. She was the one he was planning a future with, using the very money I had saved during years of financial sacrifice. And that was just the tip of the iceberg. I uncovered that David had signed a lease for a small office in downtown Asheville under the name Green & Co., a boutique marketing firm registered 6 months prior. And the listed owner? None other than Allison. They weren't just cheating. They were building a full escape plan, legally, carefully, and in a way that could erase me from the equation at any moment. David thought I was still the blind, loyal wife. What he didn't know was that I still had our prenuptial agreement from 1998, the one he insisted on because I had more assets at the time. That agreement included a key clause, Clause 14, the fidelity provision, which stated that any act of infidelity would forfeit the violating party's rights to joint assets accumulated after year 10 of the marriage. We were now in year 26. I didn't say a word to David. I played along, pretending to believe he was just busy with work trips, project pitches, and yoga classes. Whatever lies he tossed my way, I received them with polite smiles and silent nods. But behind his back, I met with my attorney, presented the files, recorded shady phone calls, saved misplaced texts, and made copies of every suspicious financial document. I even hired a cybersecurity expert to back up content from an iCloud account David had forgotten was still logged in on Lauren's old iPad, the one I never reset. From that point, I had everything. Beach selfies, hotel receipts, even an 11-minute voice recording where David told Allison, "She never suspects a thing. Claire always thinks I'm just a harmless dreamer." That's her biggest weakness. That wasn't a weakness. It was a trap. And he had walked straight into it. I scheduled an appointment with my attorney, filed with the court, and signed the divorce papers on the Wednesday before Lauren's graduation, ensuring the paperwork was accepted, but not yet public. I also submitted a request for temporary freezing of all joint accounts and restricted access per the terms of our prenup. David had no idea any of this when he raised his glass at the party to surprise me. He thought he was the one springing a twist. But in truth, every move he made was one I had already predicted and built around. I remember the exact moment after I walked out of the restaurant, David holding the envelope with trembling hands, shouting in panic, "Claire, what the hell did you just do?" I didn't answer because I didn't need to. I didn't need to shout to strike back. All I needed was the truth and the law to stand beside me. By the time I pulled into our driveway, the sun had just started to dip behind the rooftops of Westover Hills. The fading light cast long shadows over the colonial-style house David and I had bought together 15 years earlier. Once a symbol of shared dreams, it now stood as a quiet battleground. And I was ready for the final round. I changed out of my dress, slipped on a charcoal gray cardigan, and opened my laptop. The folder marked CLT legal file glowed back at me on the screen, containing scanned divorce filings, proof of fraudulent transactions, photo evidence, audio files, and a copy of the prenup signed by David, notarized back in 1998. David was the one who had insisted I sign that prenup when we got married, claiming it was career protection. At the time, he had just borrowed money from my father to start his first company. He wanted to protect his future earnings. And now, that very infidelity clause would become the blade he'd have to swallow. Unexpectedly, David came home earlier than I anticipated. His car skidded into the driveway. I heard the door slam open, followed by the sound of rushed footsteps pounding on the hardwood floor. "Claire," he shouted, gripping the envelope I'd left at the restaurant. "Are you out of your mind? You filed for divorce this morning?" I closed my laptop, stood up, calm as ever. "You said you wanted to start a new life, didn't you? I'm just helping speed things along. You don't have the right to freeze our accounts." "I have every right," I said, handing him the temporary asset freeze order signed by the Mecklenburg County Court, "and the right to retain this house until the court makes its decision." "Claire, you can't do this. This is our home." I walked over to the fireplace, pulled out another envelope from a hidden compartment behind our wedding photo. It was a printed copy of the prenup, on soft yellow legal paper. "Remember Clause 14, about fidelity?" David's face went pale. "That expired. It's been over 20 years. I smiled. Clause 27 says it remains in effect until the marriage ends, not based on time, but on behavior. And the proof of your behavior? It's all right here. I tapped the external hard drive on the table. And in Lauren's iCloud account, you forgot you're still logged into. David was silent. I didn't say another word. I wanted him to have time to realize every move he made had been watched, not with rage, but with intellect and chilling silence. He pulled out his phone, fumbling to text, probably to Allison. I said slowly, "You should also know. Your credit report is under review. Using marital funds to support a third party is a violation of financial responsibility in a legal marriage under North Carolina law." He spun around, eyes wide. "So this is revenge?" "No," I replied coldly. "This is justice. And this is how I protect 26 years of my life from being erased by a cheap toast at a dinner table." The room was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. David backed toward the door without another word. As it shut behind him, I exhaled. For the first time, freely. 2 hours later, I got a message from my lawyer. The court had accepted the divorce petition and granted temporary possession and control of all disputed assets pending trial. I would keep the house, the SUV registered in my name, my personal retirement account, and 70% of the joint assets accumulated after 2008, exactly as stated in the agreement David once insisted I sign to protect his future. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to retaliate by causing pain. I just needed the truth, and this time the truth was on my side. The first hearing took place on a dreary Monday morning, with heavy rain pouring down over Charlotte. I arrived at the courthouse 30 minutes early with my attorney, Mitchell Granger, a quiet, razor-sharp man who had handled more than 300 divorce cases involving complex financial issues. He was not one to waste words. David showed up nearly 10 minutes late, wearing a wrinkled suit and accompanied by a young attorney who looked more like an intern than legal counsel. His legal rep came from a firm specializing in commercial contract disputes, not family law. I nearly laughed. The judge was Clarice Reynolds, known throughout North Carolina's legal circles for her no-nonsense demeanor. As she flipped to page 4 of our prenuptial agreement, I saw the color drain from David's face. Clause 14, Judge Reynolds read aloud, states that in the event of infidelity, the offending party forfeits all rights to joint marital property acquired during the marriage, excluding any personal assets proven to have been obtained prior to the union. Is that correct, Mr. Caldwell? David started to object, but his young attorney gently tugged his sleeve. He simply nodded. Judge Reynolds continued, "The court accepts the evidence provided by Mrs. Thompson as valid, including financial transactions, messages, photographs, and audio recordings. The order to freeze all jointly held assets remains in effect, covering investment accounts, real estate, and all high-value property tied to both parties." David tried to rise. "Your Honor, this is unfair. I have a right to live, a right to access my own funds." "Mr. Caldwell," Judge Reynolds cut in sharply, "you have a personal account valued at $84,000, which you transferred from joint assets. You are allowed to retain that amount for now, but it will be subject to further investigation during the formal trial in 30 days. The room fell silent. David sank back into his seat, face red as a beet, knuckles white from gripping the edge of the bench. His true nature. An arrogant man with no integrity, willing to discard his wife and daughter, had finally been exposed under the weight of justice. 3 days after the hearing, I received a text from an unfamiliar number. "Allison Green," she wrote. "I didn't know it would be like this. He told me they were separated and financially stable." "I'm sorry," I didn't reply. But a few hours later, I got a call from an old friend who worked the front desk at Condor Heights. Allison had moved out of the penthouse David leased under both their names. No goodbye, no fancy luggage, just a canvas bag and a panicked look. The woman David once called his fresh start had left exactly 9 days after the first court hearing. David had none of what he'd promised. The apartment was 2 months behind on rent. The brand new BMW SUV, paid for using our joint account, had been repossessed after missed payments. And his so-called investment firm, David Caldwell Ventures? Just an unregistered mock website. It was all a facade David had built to convince Allison and himself that his life was entering a new chapter, but that new chapter turned out to be nothing more than shredded paper and delusions. Within 2 weeks of the hearing, I began receiving calls from old friends, those who once sided with David. Some sent apologies, others went silent and quietly backed away. It turned out most of them had known about David's affair for some time but didn't say anything, out of fear of causing drama or the belief that it wasn't their place. I didn't blame them, I just felt relieved. I had lived inside a web of sugar-coated friendships, hollow at the core, and now that it had all collapsed, it made room for something far more valuable: freedom, truth, and the end of pretending. Lauren came home one Saturday afternoon, carrying a basket of homemade cookies and 2 cups of coffee from our favorite cafe. She sat next to me, handed me one, and said quietly, "I don't want to call him Dad anymore." I held her hand. "You don't have to cut him off, but you have the right to choose your boundaries and the right to protect yourself." She nodded, and, in her eyes, I saw a reflection of myself. Not the woman who once sacrificed silently, but the one who was now rising after the storm. 30 days after the first court hearing, I moved my workspace out of the old dining room, once filled with family documents and financial files, into a new space, Suite 203A, on the 2nd floor of Riverview offices, right along the Catawba River. A bright, airy place with the constant scent of fresh coffee drifting from the cafe downstairs. The company name etched on the glass: Thompson Financial Renewal. Helping women navigate divorce, rebuild freedom, and reclaim financial control. I used to think I was too old to start over, but it turns out 52 is the perfect age to let go of tired roles: the patient wife, the silent mother juggling everything, and become something entirely new: a guide, a light for women who feel lost in the dark, the way I once did. My first client was Megan Delaney, 46, a florist whose husband seized most of her earnings post-divorce. I helped her rebuild her books, file with the IRS, and renegotiate her settlement with a new lawyer. My second client was Jasmine Ortiz, 39, a head nurse whose husband secretly sold joint assets before filing for divorce. I taught her how to trace money through shell accounts and aliases. After the first month, I had 6 clients. After 3 months, I hired an administrative assistant and began offering Zoom classes for women in other states, places where divorce laws didn't protect them as well as in North Carolina. Lauren was the one who encouraged me to build it all from scratch. "You didn't just survive this," she once told me. "You turned it into a torch for others to follow." I saw pride in her eyes every time she walked into my office, laptop in hand, ready to tweak the website or draft social media posts. "You're not just my mom," Lauren said. "You're my biggest inspiration." For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the woman behind the scenes. I was simply me. Claire Thompson, the woman who once carried a family. Now, the woman designing her future on her own terms. One time, during a live stream on legal support, a woman from Texas asked me, "How do you know when it's time to stand up, when it's time to choose yourself?" I paused for a few seconds, then answered, "When you look in the mirror and see someone fading, when you hear someone say your name and even you don't believe that name deserves your self-respect. That's when." That live stream hit over 12,000 views within 48 hours, and I began receiving handwritten letters, emails, and messages from women everywhere, even those who had never been divorced but felt trapped in marriages that were no longer healthy. As for David, I heard he moved in with an old friend in Huntersville after his lease was terminated due to poor credit. The small business he planned to launch with Allison was indefinitely postponed after no investors came through. Especially once Allison posted anonymously on Reddit about a man who promised everything but left nothing but unpaid bills and a sofa with a broken leg. I didn't laugh when I read that post. I quietly saved it in a folder labeled Expensive Lessons, like a kind of memory-based asset. One late afternoon, Lauren and I sat on the office balcony, watching the sunset reflect off the river. She sipped her tea and said, "It's kind of sad, really. If Dad had just told the truth, just said things weren't the same anymore, you might have still split things fairly, handled it with grace." I nodded. But some people don't know how to leave with kindness, they only know how to destroy. And you knew how to rebuild from the wreckage, Lauren smiled. I squeezed her hand. Yes, I had come back to life. Not through luck, but through choice. And the will to not be erased from my own story. That morning, I had just wrapped up my third consultation when the phone rang. The caller ID lit up, David Caldwell. For the first time in almost 3 months since the hearing. I wasn't planning to answer, but then instinct kicked in. Stay in control. I picked up, set it on speaker, and kept my voice calm and professional. Clay Thompson speaking. There was silence for a few seconds before David's voice came through. Low, hoarse, and tired. Claire, it's me. I know, I probably shouldn't be calling, but I didn't respond. I wanted to hear it all, to know what was left of him after everything. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, I was wrong, all of it was my fault. I remained silent. I lost the best thing I ever had, you and Lauren, and now, every day I regret it. I leaned back in my chair, eyes drifting toward the window where a red maple swayed gently in the breeze. Some apologies come too late. Not because they're not sincere, but because the damage has gone too far to undo. David continued. Allison's gone, she said. I was an empty dream, and she's right. I built everything on illusions. Now I have nothing left. Just memories of you, and this fragile hope that maybe you'll forgive me. Answered softly, without anger or bitterness. David, the only thing left between us is a divorce decree signed by a judge. He choked up. I could hear his breathing quicken on the other end. Claire, I'm not calling to ask for anything. Just, if there's ever a chance, I'd like to see you. Just once, for a proper conversation. I closed my eyes for a second, then opened them again. To what end, David? To relive what you ruined? Or to plant another illusion in your mind that there's still a chance? Silence. You don't need to answer, I continued. Just know, I'm no longer the woman waiting for you to change. I'm the woman who changed, so she'd never have to wait again. I hung up, not out of anger, but because I had truly let go. The Claire I used to be lived to please. The Claire I am now lives to do what's right. That evening, Lauren and I sat on the porch. She brought over homemade lasagna, using a recipe from her cooking class for busy professionals. You know, Mom, she said between bites, I used to think divorce meant failure, but watching you, I see now it was the bravest choice. I smiled. Divorce doesn't define who's right or wrong. It simply reveals the truth, that when someone no longer wants to walk beside you, you can either stand still or move forward. Alone, but in the right direction. She was quiet for a moment, then touched my hand. Thank you for showing me that. A week later, I received an invitation to speak at a conference in Atlanta. Women who reclaimed their power. I was selected as the keynote speaker to share my story of reclaiming financial stability and personal identity after divorce. I would stand before 500 women, many still afraid, many just beginning to step out of darkness, and I already knew what I'd say. My name is Claire. I once lost everything. Trust, marriage, self-worth. But I rose again. Not for revenge, but to return to who I really am. No one can erase your value unless you hand them the pen and let them cross it out. In a world full of empty promises, I chose truth. In a marriage full of performances, I chose authenticity. David chose to leave with a dagger. I chose to walk away with solid steps. And that door? It closed. For good. Claire's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes, in life, loss isn't the end. It's the beginning of a stronger version of yourself. Being betrayed doesn't define a woman's worth. What defines it is how she rises, rebuilds, and chooses to help others through it. Claire represents millions of women out there, once overlooked, once silenced, who now walk out of the shadows with pride, wisdom, and a fearless heart. What do you think of Claire's choice? Would you have done the same in her shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow the channel for more real, moving stories about life, love, and family.